Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. With me in the studio, as always, is the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Eric J. Morin.
Glad to be back. We've done a lot of traveling. We've had events. We've had surgery. We've had all kinds of things. Those of you are loyal listeners. I think we've been, I've been in Toronto, LA, West Palm Beach. Where else did I go? And somebody else too. I don't know. I've been all over the place. We've had events. It's been a crazy few weeks. And then I had emergency surgery. So look, I mean, we go through it all to bring you the Dental Wealth Podcast. So here we are, back in the studio.
I had a couple doctors at the actual mastermind that we had last week. They're like, when are you guys going to get back in? And I told them, they're listening right now. Dr. Carrie White Brown, there's your shout out. Dr. Judy Kwan, there's your shout out. Hey, if you guys need great dentists in the South Carolina area, in the Virginia area, those two will make sure you're taken care of. I told them, I was like, I'm going to give you guys a shout out just so you know we're back at it, baby. I love being in the studio.
Back at it.
We got high energy as always. We've been trying to figure out, okay, so we're going to start getting this on a clip. We have a window here that we'll be able to get in the studio and shoot some podcasts for you guys. So it's a very special topic. You know, I think it was like a light bulb genius that came out. We were flying out to LA and Eric came up with this great concept that we got a lot of great feedback from. And it's kind of like, it's just 5 pillars. So when you're sitting down, you're driving into work, or you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you take the time to really hone into this part and figure out where you fall in the 5 pillars. So I'll let Eric kind of explain what those 5 pillars are, and then we'll get jumping in.
Well, I think that started from you and I were coming back from LA, and I was on a plane, and really we were having a conversation of, I had recently had a consultant reach out to me, and he said he wanted to know if I would buy his book of business. He had roughly 100, I think, dental clients, and I said, I passed. I said, no, I'm good. And that really came from this concept of, he said, you know, his clients were $900,000 mostly in revenue, and a lot of them were struggling and those types of things. And I said, you know, really at Tower, we really deal with a more sophisticated client, somebody who's probably, you know, at least over, you know, 167, probably the minimum. And then most of them are scaling to groups and scaling to DSOs, and or at least very ambitious, one location who's very ambitious or whatever. I said, so we have a different level of sophistication. And so I said, I politely declined the offer. But I said, you know, because I have to get them, if I was to take on these clients, I would have to take them over, right, number 1, which I'll explain in a second. And I said, look, there's tiers to growth. And I said, you know, you really have to understand that these tiers are where you should be looking at your business and saying, what's next? And these are tiers that are in my mind, you know, and then I just put down on a piece of paper, because I said, look, these are just the tiers that you should think about when you think about your business. And going back down to the first part, you and I were sitting there working through this, and I just said, the first part is pretty much this idea of entrepreneurial illusion. You know, there's a joke we were telling the other day, like anybody can put CEO on like anything now, right? So it's like people put like, you know, someone's in a multi-level marketing business or whatever, and they're the CEO,
30 titles.
Right? Yeah.
There's 30 titles.
CEO. Yeah. What was I saying at the event? I said, like, you're CEO / biohacker / whatever, you know, Instagram title or whatever it is. And I said, you know, I said anybody can buy a business and they call themselves an entrepreneur. But just because you buy a business does not mean you are an entrepreneur. And in fact, you're a business owner, but you're not really an entrepreneur. And the first thing you have to do, and I've talked about this with other doctors that are more sophisticated, I've talked about this with other consultants, is there's like this first level that we all know about. And it's this person who comes to you and they're at 600 grand, 700 grand, 800 grand, 900 grand, something like that. And they call themselves an entrepreneur, but they're not. And the thing is, you've got to get them to a place where they truly understand entrepreneurial basics. And that doesn't always happen. It's honestly, completely honest. And I'd be lying to you if I told you otherwise. There are some people that just will never get, they're not entrepreneurs. They should be associates forever. They bought a business. They'll never scale it. And they'll probably just sell it to a DSO or something at some point because they're just not entrepreneurs. Yeah. So I call it the first step the entrepreneurial illusion. And this is challenging the belief that ownership equals entrepreneurship. I wanted to address the substantial effort and investment needed to truly progress because a lot of people struggle to move past this stage due to the heavy lift required. There's a heavy lift required at stage one, which is the idea that I've got to learn the basics of scaling. I've got to learn to reinvest. I've got to hire associates. I've got to hire other people. I've got to market. I've got to do these things. Like we had a guy who it was like a year ago, who was like, I just don't believe in associates. They just don't work. I was like, you're not entrepreneur. Like you don't get scalability. And so it's an illusion, right? And a lot of people get stuck right here. And whether we see this in the future or not inside this industry, I don't know, because of the fact that DSOs are kind of changing the initial marketplace. And then dentists emerging from school are going to find it very difficult to buy in because, when practices are doing 12 million, 15 million, 30 million, whatever, it's going to be hard to buy in like they used to when they could buy half for $600,000 or something. Yeah. So we're finding ourselves in a different place. And so this entrepreneurial illusion is a lot of dental practices that are still out there that are just, I always tell people, like, if you're at $800,000 after 30 years, you're not an entrepreneur. I mean, you're just not. And I don't mean any disrespect by that statement. It's just true. You're just not an entrepreneur. You own a business, but you're not an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurism is actually growing, scaling, leveraging, those types of things. And so assuming you get to the place where you've hired an associate, where you understand the investment in marketing is needed, where you get to a place where you're growing the business, you're scaling it, maybe adding a second location, maybe not, but you start to understand that if I invest in marketing, if I invest in capacity, if I invest in team, I will start to see returns. And so I started so there's an investment needed. And a lot of people get stuck. And by the way, it's like, I just saw something the other day was like, this person who's consulting for $700 a month or something. I was like, well, that person probably it's not going to get you past the entrepreneurial illusion. They're probably going to bring in some systems, maybe a little hygiene stuff, maybe pump up revenue. But until you mentally get past the stage where you're a operator and you move into the owner, but the true entrepreneurial sense of the word owner, you're going to get stuck. Okay. So there's that step. So I said to this person who wanted me to buy their book of business, I said, look, here's the deal. The challenge is all these people, ultimately I have to give them past step one. Yeah. And that's a big lift. It's a big lift. And at Tower Leadership, it's not where we spend the majority of our time, is trying to get that big lift, because there's also something with those people too, which is that 90% of them probably will never do the work. And that's why they're stuck at stage one or below stage one.
Mm-hmm. And they might have tried to get past that and they just got beat down so many times. I think, being an entrepreneur means you got to have adversity. Like you gotta embrace the challenges that come with it. And I think, embrace the suck. Like got to, because when especially in a dental practice, there's going to be so many things that happen over the course of years. And what I've seen, or through the phone calls that I've had in the past, it's, they get to a point where, the associate quits, then their front desk quits, and then the operations director quits. And they're just like, all right, I'm fine with being a 1.1 million, maybe $800,000, $900,000 practice, and I'm good. It's not only they realize how bad that is long term when they go to, retire, and they realize, oh, I've been making this much money for this many years and it gets cut basically by a quarter. That's when they start having issues. And I think, if you're listening to this and you're trying to figure it out, you need to rekindle that entrepreneurial spirit. So how can you grow it? How can you scale it? You got to compete in this marketplace, and you got to embrace the suck. You just have to, because that's the only way you're going to progress to the next pillar.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of, you have to be willing to take on risk. I would argue there's a point of risk. True entrepreneurs are willing to risk. They're willing to get uncomfortable. They're willing to invest in things they don't know if there's a return on. They're willing to give things the chance. And they're not so conservative that they're not, they're scared to make an investment inside their business. And so that's step one. Step two being someone who gets this point now that they're not stuck at one, right? So one's being stuck at this entrepreneurial illusion where you're never going to get past this hump. when you're at 2, you're really at strategic scaling fundamentals. So now we're really at the place in stage 2 where, okay, I get it, Eric. I need to invest in marketing. I need to not fire my marketing company after 3 weeks because I didn't get 5,000 patients or whatever's going through the internet. By the way, a lot of that stuff on the internet, y'all have got to filter that better. There's a lot of just garbage on the internet right now. And so it's just true. You need a great partner in marketing that you can work with for a long period of time. Your marketing company is not a marketing company you should be with for 6 months. You should be with them for 6 years.
Yeah.
So you got to invest in marketing. You have to be able to invest in capacity. You have to be able to invest in team. You have to be willing to open up your hours. You have to be able to get the associate in. You have to be able to get 2 associates. Like that's the strategic scaling standpoint in phase 2. So 1 being entrepreneurial illusion, where you're not really an entrepreneur, you just own a business. 2 is when you've gotten in that phase where you start scaling, where you start investing. Maybe you haven't seen all the returns yet, but you get scalability. And so you start to grow. You start to see an expansion in capabilities, expansion in profitability, expansion in growth, expansion in team, the ability to pull back maybe some clinical hours. That's what the second step is you start to get that taste. I'm like, okay, I get this. Now, interestingly enough, most people get stuck right there.
Yeah.
Okay. And here's why. There's something called the proverbial valley of death. And what happens in most companies is they get to a certain point, and a dental practice is probably around $2 to $3 million, where they have scaled into stage 2, but they haven't ever invested in great management. And because they've never invested in great management, the doctor's still doing everything. Great conversation yesterday with a doctor, with an oral surgeon. I was talking to him, and he's got 2 locations. And what happened was he can't get to everything. And he doesn't have the strong management capabilities. He has managers, but if he doesn't make sure it happens, it doesn't get done. He can't grow and scale. He can't do all the things he needs to because he has to make sure. I always tell people, like, if nothing gets done in your business without you doing it, you've reached an operational ceiling. Like you're stuck. And so number 3 would be operational mastery and optimization of the business, which is the idea of you're delving into more advanced operational techniques, efficiencies, streamlined processes. You're creating leadership teams. There's a lot of growth inside of the business as far as KPIs, OKRs, regular meetings, looking at the numbers all the time, putting in processes, handling HR, all these things that you're probably focused on now. And this happens somewhere between 2 to 4 million. I'd say 2 to 3 million, but I'm saying, I still see this around 4, even 4.5 sometimes. And now can it go higher? Sure. I mean, you could have 4 locations, 5 locations, but struggling operationally. And that's costing you a lot of money. So there's the 3 would be operational mastery and optimization. You've got to get great managers in. You've got to be willing to invest in management. If you're having to make sure everything gets done, you're just stuck. And you probably want to continue to grow.
And I would say this is probably, other than being the entrepreneur, I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges for dental practices. I mean, the whole reason why we brought in Lisa and her team to do on-site consulting is to fix those problems, is to go in, analyze the business, say, this is operationally where you guys are messing up. And then we go in and fix the challenge. It's the doctors that realize, all right, I've got big aspirations. I know that I've got a successful to this point. I've grown a pretty good business. It's almost like looking at becoming the teen years to your adult years. You got to put the structure in place for you to be able to massively scale the organization. So you have to take a step back and say, all right, how big do I want to create this? Do I have the systems to be able to do it? And this is where operationally, if you grow too fast and you don't have the operations in place, the rest falls apart. So you got to set the foundation operationally in order to make sure you don't have to do everything. Because we get the calls all the time where a doctor's, doing 4 or 5 million and they're like, I need help from like I have to do everything. I'm still clinically working 4 to 5 days a week. And that's not a long-term successful plan. So we need to put some things in place in order to scale out the operations of the business.
I think that everyone needs to hear me on this. So this is a little bit of number 4 really kicks in the law of the lid, but number 3 is this idea that operationally you've got to get past office managers. You probably need more director of operations, more COO type situation. This is where you need advance in operations. So it means somebody else to do all this work. So I'll give you a great example. Well, how does this affect me, Eric? So I had a doctor I started working with in January. And one of the advisors was working with his doctor for maybe 2 months or 3 months at Tower. And I jumped in. I said I wanted to talk to his doctor, and I was intrigued by his story. And I looked at the list of things he was supposed to get done. And I said to the doctor, I said, hey, listen, based on 3 months, a quarter of a year, I see this. You've got none of them done. He was like, right. And I said, okay, what are the odds of you getting all this stuff done in the next quarter? And he was like, not good. And I was like, okay, well, you want to continue to do that? And he was like, well, no. I was like, well, let's hire an operations person to get all this stuff done. Let's find someone else. And we did. So what's the impact of that? So he hires a guy, brings him in, and then guess what? That person I gave some direction to, it increased the annual revenue. That one hire, because I was able to then get this person doing what needed to be done, the one hire this next calendar year will increase revenues by $4 million. That's right. This one hire will increase revenues by $4 million at a minimum. At a minimum. We're going to get a $4 million. I think this person probably costs $150.
Yeah.
And we're getting a $4 million return. Now it's top line, of course. We got to, probably get 20% of that. But it's a massive return. It's a massive return to the business. And it's a massive return in valuation. And it's a massive return in the ability to grow. So what happens is people get stuck and they can't ever get past this stage. So this doctor was stuck at strategic scaling and fundamentals. I pushed them to stage 3, which now we got somebody in there, and now it's going to push up the revenues. I'll grow the revenues another $10 million over the next probably 24, 36 months. So these are huge steps. And this doctor I talked to yesterday, I said to him, I said, I have so many things I'm trying to get done and move you dramatically. At Tower, we don't move people $200,000 a year. That's just too Bush League. It's too linear. Exponential moves are going to take the right team. And so you can't move exponentially if you don't have the right team to move exponentially. You can make linear moves. I need a little bit of hygiene, a little bit of scheduling efficiencies, reducing cancellations. Those things are linear moves. But exponential moves, right, are the ones that you really want. And those exponential moves are not going to happen unless you have the right team in place. So that's number 3. Number 4. Number 4 is the law of the lid. Right? Law of the lid, the old John Maxwell concept, is that your business is held back. Its ability to grow is held back by its own leadership capabilities. So in number 4, now that we have the operational team we need to put things in place, we need to cultivate leadership skills, and we need to implement those into scalable systems that support this robust practice, which means that I need leaders. I need not just one leader. I don't need just an operations director. I need leaders. I need 5 leaders, 6 leaders, 7 leaders. I need a leadership team. I need people to meet so that if I disappear for 30 days, no one even knew I was gone. I need other people coming up with ideas. I need other people going to training. I need other people who are bringing in ingenuity, creativity, background, capabilities. I need those people inside my organization. If I'm really going to move this son of a gun, it's going to take me more than an operations director. It's going to take me building out leadership and leadership teams that are sophisticated, that understand the concepts, that can explain vision and direction and the why and motivate and systems and creativity and thoughts and just like you've got to cultivate this amazing leadership around your common vision. And that's like step 4. And so if you don't have operations, if you're like, well, I'm just going to cultivate these leaders, you'll never get there, because the leaders will get disgruntled because they're instead of getting to focus on all the great stuff, they have to focus on all the operational lacks, and you'll never get there. Your whole leadership meetings will be taken up with problems, issues. So you've got to follow these in step, which is you've got to be able to take leadership, innovation, scalable implementation, right? You have to take that number 4, and you got to get that down. If you get that down, if you get to the place where you've got your operational capabilities locked in, and you've got leadership, great leaders, and you've invested in leadership, you got that locked in, man, I'm going to tell you right now, you are in a position to move like nobody else can move. Like you're in this amazing place.
Yeah, I think when you get the operations in place too, so when you're going from 3 to 4, the great news is as you're starting to do level 3 or pillar 3, you're going to have people that raise their hand as leaders within your organization. You're going to have people that when you're putting these operational things in place that are going to step up to the plate and say, hey, I can help you with that. I can help the operations director with that. Hey, let me take that off of your plate. Have you guys thought about doing this? What you'll do is start to see the leadership rise in the organization. And then it's up to you as the doctor to cultivate that leadership. What leadership training are you doing? How do you take someone that is raising their hand to be a leader and take them from a beginner to an expert? So that's where you need to invest in the leadership of the organization. By then, you should know. When you're in pillar 4, you should know who the leaders are based on how you've progressed through the pillars and who took charge, who raised their hand and said, I'm going to help you on this mission. And then you need to take that person and try to invest heavily into their skill set, into their leadership to help grow the organization, because you're going to be capped by that leadership, just like you said. So how do I get to pillar 5 is you need to invest heavily in the leadership of the organization. People will be raising their hand saying, I want to do this, I want to do this. So how do you cultivate that? How do you build a culture that says, once you're a leader in the organization, deemed a leader, how do we invest in you to make you successful?
Well, yeah, and it's not just in investing in internal leaders that are already there. It's also grabbing external leaders too. You might have to go outside your organization as well and go get strong leaders that bring in your organization that can help you run and grow this thing. So I think that part's important to note, is that you probably need this innovation and scalable implementation. I think you need leadership. That you got to have this leadership. You got to have these people involved. But I'm just going to tell you, like, if you're not walking into a room right now and looking at the leaders in the room and going, damn, I cannot believe I get to work with these talented folks, man. They have so many ideas, so many great things. They bring so many things to the table. Like, you almost feel like they know way more than you in some cases. If you're not doing that, you're not at stage 4. So don't say, yeah, I am. If you're having to think around operational things and SOPs and hiring, if you're having to contact doctors, if you're trying to figure out all the KPIs and scorecards and run the meetings and marketing and you're not even at 3. Okay. So, it's okay to be at 2, just know you're at 2. And lastly, once you get all this stuff figured out, then we get into capital strategy and model duplication. I think people want to duplicate their models. This is why people buying second locations and third locations and watching their profitability go to nothing, is because they're duplicating a failed model. It's like you have a failing model and then you want to duplicate that over and over and over again. Now, it wasn't failing when you were producing 4 days a week, because ultimately speaking, you weren't paying someone else to do the work. But now that you're paying someone else to do the work, you go, holy moly. At my main location where I produce, we're netting $40,000 a month. At the other location, we're losing $4,000 a month. It's like, I understand that, because you scaled a model that wasn't perfected yet. Yeah. You didn't have the leadership. You didn't have the operations. You didn't have the strategic financial planning. You didn't have even accounting. You didn't have all the numbers. You didn't have the EBITDA. You didn't have the maximization of of profitability for fixed costs. You're not actually increasing the scalability of the organization the way you need to. And because you're not doing that and you're feeling frustrated, and this happens, by the way, I'm just saying it happens right now more than anything. Like, people are just scaling incorrectly. So you need to get to the place where you've got scalability, you understand that, you build the operations and the team to be able to ultimately implement operations, you build the leadership to be able to scale the operations and to get everyone on the same page and have team retention and those types of things. And when you get it down, now we master capital management and we develop strategies for replicating this successful model. So now that we've got this awesome model, now we look at capital allocation. All right, Eric, it's going to take me $4 million here. This is how much I'm going to invest. This is what I expect from a return standpoint. This would be awesome if this, and this. And now we can start to say, look, we could put $2 million here, or we could put $4 million there. We could put, here's the internal rate of return of this transaction. Why don't we, then now we're starting to grow people, dramatically. And so this is, people are like, Eric, how do you move somebody? I was on a call last week. Actually, you and I were in a room, Matthew, where people last week were just baffled when we told them the numbers that we've been able to move people at Tower. And that's not an ego thing. It's just that we look at how we can make exponential moves, not just linear moves. And most people are making linear moves inside the business. And if you can learn how to maximize linear moves and make exponential moves, and you go through these 5 phases, man, you'll wake up and you'll have a $50 million business. And that's just the truth.
Yeah. And I think the capital management part of that on pillar 5 is probably one of the most crucial things that I see doctors miss out on. I think, a great question to ask yourself right now is, all right, if I'm going to go to multiple locations, am I going to do, if you don't know the answer to this question, then you don't have a strategy. Or do I do de novo or do I buy a practice? If you don't know the answer to that question, if you're thinking that right now, then you don't have a strategy in place. So you are not on level 5. Like you need to figure that out first, because your strategy leading to that point should tell you what you need to do, whether it's a de novo or you're buying somebody else's practice. And then you need to know how much funds you're going to need to do that. Where do I allocate properly to get this thing off the ground running? Do I need to bring in an associate? Does it have an associate? Like, all of these things are strategy. So if you don't have this in place and you can't answer that question, you lack a strategy. So you need to go back basically to pillar 1 and say, all right, I'm an entrepreneur. This is what I want to create. I need a game plan. Because if you do not have a game plan in place, you're going to be stuck. And we see it time and time again. And I always ask that question too when I was doing sales calls in the past, when people were calling in and they were like, oh, I want to grow. I want to do this. Well, tell me about that. What's your strategy? Oh, I'm thinking about, I lease a building now. I'm thinking about buying the real estate. I'm thinking. Well, that's not a strat. Like, when's the last time you sat down with someone and said, all right, this is exactly what I want to create. Can you lay out what strategy we should take? Okay, well, we got to break apart everything. Do you have the systems? Have you maximized your current location? Why do you want to do this? So if you can't answer any of those questions, then we need to start pulling back a little bit and start looking at our pillars to make sure everything's in place. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to scale correctly. Yeah,
I completely agree. And I think that this is a good roadmap for someone who's looking to grow and scale. If you want to create some check marks and say, look, these are the things now, these are the things I need to do. These are the 5 phases and where am I at? Now, it could be fair to say you're working at 5 phases simultaneously to some degree, of course, but you're mostly sitting in one area. And so figure out what that is. And be real with yourself. I mean, there's no reason for you to fool yourself, right? Fool someone else, but don't fool yourself. I mean, look at this and say, this is where I'm at. And this is what's holding me back, and then create a strategy to overcome it. And if you're truly trying to grow, and if you're under entrepreneurial illusion, decide what you want to do. Do you continue to want to play a game, or do you want to actually figure this thing out? Because look, there are people that are in entrepreneurial illusion that can cross over, but it's a very small amount of them. If you truly want it, you got to create it. And the lift is huge. And so you got to understand, do I really want this lift? And if you do that, you'll create a massive, amazing things. And I encourage you to do that, and push the needle, because I think that there's something amazing to build here. As far as your practice, your wealth, your valuation, your freedom of time and money and purpose and relationship. And so this is work that's worthy of your time. But this is really an exponential conversation. These are exponential moves, not linear moves.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at these pillars, you need to be objective too. You need to be your own worst critic. So if you're going through this, you're like, I'm on level 5 immediately. You're not on level 5. It was awesome. I had a doctor come up to us, or come up to me at the actual event when we were going through this concept with him. And he was like, man, I thought I was on level 4. Like, I thought I was on the 4th pillar, and I realized I'm only on level 2. So he was humble enough to come up to me and say, yeah, that really opened my eyes, because I know I've got a lot of work to do. And, at times you feel like you have it all together. You have to have a grounding, like you have to have something that grounds you. And if it depends on what it is, we have a lot of concepts that we go through. And if you want to latch onto this concept, use it to ground yourself, like grade yourself out very harshly on this, so that you know that there's always progress. You can always be getting better. Which you want to strive for something, which is the pillar 5. And then when you add another location, you need to add that location and say, all right, where do I start on these pillars? Does this bring me back a notch? Does this keep me in line with where I'm currently at? So when you're growing and scaling, you have to use something to ground yourself along the way. So this was, when we were sitting on the plane and we were going through this, we were like, yeah, this is great. Sometimes there's strokes of brilliance that Mr. Morin has. And he needs somebody like just to put a little gasoline on it.
Well, it's good. Well, glad everyone on the podcast. Go back and look at this. Go back and look at your own business, and then create a game plan. I mean, the information alone won't get you there. I mean, you gotta be able to have the tools for implementation. You can learn about farming, but if you have no tractor, you won't get very far. So know where you're at, know, where you sit, and then go through the tools of implementation and say, okay, now I know this. What are my next steps, and what do I need to do? Now, certainly, we're always here to help if you want our help. If you want to try to do this yourself, then go at it. But understand you need to understand the 5 phases of, or the 5 tiers of dental practice growth, and then figure out where you're at, and then create a game plan to get to the next phase.
It's always good being back in the studio. For those of you that aren't subscribed to our YouTube page, go to our YouTube page and hit the subscription button, like, share. As always, Mr. Morin, pleasure to have you in the studio. We're going to keep getting back at this. We'll be back in the studio next Tuesday. We'll shoot some more great podcasts for you. So, Eric, thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you, my friend. We'll talk soon.